Good evening and welcome to another edition of Down to the Wire. I'm your host, Derbyologist, and joining me again this week is Capping with Candice, Candice here. This week we are going to go across the country and take a look at a couple of races, a couple of stakes races. But first off, we're going to kind of keep you up to date on some Belmont doings. And Candice, the big news this week is we've got Candy Boy out of the Belmont, but we did add honor medal count.
Yeah, Candy Boy, but they were kind of, they never really confirmed as it is, so that isn't really a horse who, I had really considered even in the race, even though they decided not to go. Medal count is really interesting, though, to me. I mean, he's ran some really nice races, of course. He was second up in the Bluegrass to Dance with Fate, and then his Derby was actually probably one of the top 5 performances, I thought. He was closing pretty strongly, pretty much stride for stride with Wicked Strong for a while, and then had his run completely stopped when Danza, drifted out pretty sharply and totally cut him off. So, I mean, he wouldn't have won either way, but I think a place chance was definitely, a possibility for him before what happened with Danza. So, medal count is interesting. I do think he'll be a fair price because it seems like a lot of people have really pegged him as a synthetic or turf specialist, but all in all, he's one of the few. I mean, I think maybe there's 3 horses you could say are legitimately bred to go anywhere near this far. It would be Medal Count, and it'd be Wicked Strong, and perhaps Tonalist. So, on pedigree alone, you almost have to think that Medal Count is a horse that you really have to consider.
And I did want to talk about Candy Boy a little bit. I think it was a good decision. I don't think he would have finished last in the Belmont. I think he's a true grinder that would have rounded out a top 5 or 6 finish. And you got to remember they are paying out to 8th place this year for the Belmont Stakes. But I do think, he's a West Coast-based horse. The Los Al Derby is a fairly big race this year. And if he can run first or second in that, they can stay on the West Coast. And if they want to come out east for the Haskell or Travers, they can do that. If he doesn't fire in the Los Al Derby, well, maybe he's just not as good as they thought. So I would have been happy with him in the Belmont, but I think the Los Al Derby probably gives him more options if he runs well to either go back for the Haskell or the Travers or even the Jim Dandy, or to stay out west and face older horses, depending on what happens this summer. So it's a good move. Also, some big news on Monday. I think it's always fun to have the champ back and shared belief. The field was the field, but the bottom line is he ran a 109 and change, and he's undefeated lifetime, and that puts him above a lot of horses just with those 2 things.
Yes, I thought it was a really nice race. I mean, maybe it's overblown a little bit because we all want to see him come back, and we want to see him, frank his juvenile form. I mean, he was a champion 2-year-old for a reason, but for one, I want to say I like the decision to come back on synthetic. Coming off the injury, I think that was a wise decision. As you said, the field kind of was what it was, but it wasn't a terrible field by any means. I mean, they're not up to snuff from quality-wise of what he's been up against, or at least what he was up against last year, but still an honest field. And, for me, it's another one of those races where, the field almost didn't matter. It's, how did he look in his comeback? And to me, he came back, he ran a really nice race and kind of ran away from them under a pretty strong hold. And, if anything, I liked at the end that, he kind of started to extend that stride, put that head down. And I just thought it was a really nice performance coming off of a long layoff. Now, obviously, he's behind the 8 ball a little bit compared to, the rest of this crop or the top contenders from this crop. But the potential is there, and this is step 1. So, we'll see where he goes from here. But so far, so good.
Well, this week we're going to go across the country with some different stakes races, and the first one is New York breds. Kind of a nice full field, though, at Belmont. And the interesting thing is I noticed Michael Houchon's got 3 horses on the outside, but a couple of horses that we talked about a lot this spring, both Deceived and Uncle Sigh, now they get to face New York breds.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a nice little class shot for Uncle Sigh. I don't think he disgraced himself in the Derby by any means. I mean, he was up on the front, and he slowed him down, and he just, that was what his chance was going to be, I think, and just didn't stay. Obviously cutting back now here, cutting back from a 1.25 miles to 7 furlongs. I mean, he's the class of this field. If he's going to win this race, he should, just kind of go to the front and take off and say, like, peace out, guys, because he pretty much, I mean, at least off of performance to this point, he is the fastest in this field. 7 furlongs, I think might be a touch short. I think maybe a mile or a mile and 16th is really where he's at his best. But he's classy enough that, at least compared to this group, that I'm not sure it's going to matter. I mean, he should be the one to win this race. But there are other contenders. I mean, you mentioned Deceive. That's who my top race is going to be here. He's a horse I talked about on here that I thought was, pretty nice. And I think, unlike Uncle Sigh, I do think this distance is really right up his alley. His best races have been at 7 furlongs per mile. And he's really raced. I think this is only his 3rd race of the year, so there might be a little more to be found there. And he's been working nonstop since the Gotham, and lately there's been Giamatti's thrown a couple of real stiff workouts into him, and he seems to have responded well. So he's the one I'm looking for here, purely because I think this distance is the best for him. I mean, we of course last saw him in the Gotham, and I think he was just a little bit outclassed there, and maybe it was just a touch too far. So he'll be my top choice. Uncle Sigh, though, it definitely is the class of field. It's pretty much going to be unbettable here. A few others to mention, maybe for finishing underneath. Swell is an interesting horse. He last ran over 6 furlongs at Aqueduct. That wasn't an allowance race, but it was a New York bred allowance race, so just a slight step up in class from there. But that was his performance. That's what was favoring speed that day, and he closed from I think from 6th to get all the way up to 2nd, only a length back from the winner there. So that was a pretty good performance. Again, not really a win chance, but maybe to come in, 3rd or so. The other one I want to mention, but under the same circumstances, is Loki's Vengeance. That just seems to be a horse who really is coming into his own right now. He ran in the Bay Shore with Coup de Gras and Kobe's Back and such, and I just think he had a lot of trouble up front. It was pretty quick early speed there, and he faded as a result. But other than that, I mean, he just seems to be a horse who always puts in an honest performance. So for me, Steve would be my top choice, kind of purely from an odds standpoint, because I do think at this distance, him and Uncle Sigh are, a little more comparable than they would be going further. I'll have Uncle Sigh 2nd, and then Swell and Loki's Vengeance maybe for 3rd and 4th.
I ended up going with the rail horse in this race, Empire Dreams. When I look at a 7 furlong race, there's a couple of angles I usually like, either horses that have done well at 7 furlongs or horses that are making a cutback from a mile to 7 furlongs or even a mile 70 to 7 furlongs. So he kind of fits. He gets a good post position. Ultimately, it's tough to bet horses coming out of the Derby when they lose by a lot of lengths like that. I don't think he was disgraced, but sometimes it takes him a race or two to kind of, either get that confidence back or find that winning groove. Ultimately, I'm not sure if Uncle Sigh is a 7 furlong horse, but if you just want to base it on class and possible tactical speed, actually 7 furlongs could be right up the alley of this guy. Deceived is one I'm still kind of waiting. I've always had him in the back of my mind as a turf horse. He's a big horse. He's real big and blocky and carries a lot of weight and kind of has a long stride and usually big feet. Those horses are usually kind of good on the turf. So I'm kind of hoping he can kind of muddy up his form a little bit and then get him on the turf against some New York breds. And then we can pay for vacations the rest of the summer with that info. Kind of a fun race at Penn National. A couple of years ago, they started this mile race on the turf, and it's interesting because it's usually draws a big field because of the purse, and last year it had a good field, and this year it kind of drew the best of the best 3-year-old turfers on a good race.
Yeah, I'm really excited. It's probably the race that I'm most excited for this weekend. It's got a very, very nice field. We obviously some of these we've seen. We've seen Bobby's Kitten. We've seen Global View recently won. Storming Inti we've seen a few times in Florida and at Churchill last time out. For me, though, this is a race where you have to absolutely think pace makes the race, and this is going to be a perfect example, I think. I absolutely expect this to be a fast pace. We have Bobby's Kitten, who, is kind of throwing himself to be the lead type, and he pulled really hard in the bluegrass when he wasn't on the lead. So He'll be up there. I also think Laddie Boy would be up there. Storming Inti also runs his best races up front, and Storming Inti and Bobby's Kitten are just fast. So, if those two go at it with maybe the addition of Laddie Boy, then this is going to be a pretty quick pace. So I'm going to look for horses who I envision coming from off the pace. Ultimately, my choice here is going to be Divine Oath. I think this is a horse who, he's lightly raced. He's only ran, I think, 3 times in his career. He didn't race as a 2-year-old, and his most recent race was in the Coolmore Lexington. He finished second to Mr. Speaker. And while Mr. Speaker won that race pretty soundly, I do think that that was a nicer performance from Divine Oath than he got credit for. He had a tough start there, started slow, and he ended up closing against the bias on that track. So I do think that was a pretty nice performance from him. That was going a mile and 16th, so he'll be cutting back ever so slightly here. And I don't think that's a bad thing. He has 2 wins over the turf, going 7.5 furlongs. And again, over good horses. He beat Reading Weekend down at Gulfstream, and then he beat Big Bazinga and All Tied Up in an allowance race in his second start. So this is a horse who just seems to, always put in a good run. Being so lightly raced, I think there's probably room for a little bit of improvement here. And he'll be coming from off the pace, so I think the pace is going to definitely be beneficial to him. Others I like here, I do like Coastline. He hasn't ran on the turf before, but he has put in good performances on the synthetic. His performance in Spiral I thought was pretty nice. I mean, even though he finished 3rd there, that pace was very fast, and I just thought he showed a lot of grit to hold on for a place in that spot. And again, he's another one who's been running against really good horses all along. In the Bluegrass, he kind of struggled, but that was a race where closers were just dominating there. So for him to fade, maybe isn't so bad as how it looks. Bobby's Kitten is, he obviously, I've been a fan of him. I've spoken of him on here, but I think he's going to be pace compromised. I think Storming Inti, who another one, is a really nice horse. He ran some really good races down in Florida, going against Gallo Award, who we just saw win, going against Mr. Speaker. We missed Artie, but I just think, like Bobby's Kitten, he's going to be pace compromised here. So for me, my top choice is going to be Divine Oath. And for underneath, I'm going to go with Global View, who just won over at Churchill, and then I'm going to go with Coastline.
Yeah, it's tricky because, this was carded as the 4th race on the evening, and they don't have a lot of lights, so they got to run it before it gets dark. Yet the Penn National Turf Course isn't a very wide course, so inside horses in these bigger, bulkier fields have a little bit of an advantage. But then it seems like the best horses in the race are ultimately not milers. Mm-hmm. So, a couple of angles. To me, this is the type of race you play to kind of win some money and spread. And we get so few of these races anymore that you kind of got to take advantage of them when you can. And it seems like we've got a plethora of 4 to 5s lately. And so I think a horse like Laddie Boy, who just looks totally outclassed, like this to me is a horse that's live, because I think the last couple of races, they just run them out there, they get the odds up, they ship it to a goofy track, nobody likes them, and it's a mile, but that's right up his alley. Like, this is the type of horse if this horse this horse is not going to win at Churchill, he's not going to win at Keeneland, but Penn National is where a horse like this is going to win. Another horse is Storming Inti. Is he as good as Global View and maybe Divine Oath at the end of the year? Probably not, but he's going to sit there, and he's going to be right off his Bobby Kitten flank. The Kitten, I like him. This is one where if I was sure that they just weren't going to play around and they were just going to go to the lead and try to wire the race, I think he could win it, but something tells me they're going to get cute, and they're still trying to rate him, and I don't know. It just seems like right now the Kittens are kind of on a bad vibe, and until the Kittens start winning, it seems like the Kittens go in bunches. So until the Kittens start winning again, Charming Kitten and Real Solutions and all the Kittens are kind of losing right now. So I can't go with Bobby. I do like Laddie Boy as an upset. I like Storming Inti as an upset. I'm going to go with Global View. He's at the rail. He won the last time. It was a deceptive neck. It was a well-timed ride, one of the few nice winning rides. And I think ultimately he maybe could be a tough miler. And this is the type of horse that, depending on who's in the division later on this year, I could see this 3-year-old being very competitive in the Breeders' Cup Mile. So I'm going to go with Global View, but I do think Laddie Boy and Storming Inti are very plausible just because at smaller tracks like this you get goofy results, and at an off distance for some of the other horses, maybe a horse like Laddie Boy or Storming Inti, or even, yeah, I mean, I think this is the type of race where you don't want to take too short of a price on anybody. I'm expecting a pretty fast pace, though.
Yes, me too. I definitely expect it to be fast, which is kind of my biggest concern with like Stormy Inti or Laddie Boy or Bobby's Kitten. It's going to be quick.
Then we go out west, the California Stakes, and traditionally, this was run at the old Hollywood Park as a kind of a prep race for the Hollywood Gold Cup, and this year it's at Santa Anita, and we've got a couple of horses that people will recognize, and kind of talk about the favorite. Fury Kapcori comes in with a 4-race winning streak.
You got to think he's definitely the one to beat here. He just seems like he's been almost unstoppable. At Santa Anita this year, if there is a concern for him in this race, it's the distance, but I think he's definitely is class of this field, and I mean, to some extent, it shouldn't be a total surprise. He put in some nice races last year. He ended up finishing, I think, 5th in the race with Will Take Charge and Moreno last year, if I remember right, and so he's kind of one who's been coming along I think it's taken him a little while. He's kind of come into his own. But this year he's been, unstoppable, that's for sure, at least at Santa Anita. So, I mean, he loves the track, and it's just going to be a matter of if he really loves the distance. Because most of his best wins have been, over a mile or so. Last time out, over a mile and 16th, he ran against Handsome Mike in Majestic City, who we both find here. And he pretty much destroyed both of them. So I don't see either of them having a big chance here by any means. I think if there is a horse here other than Fury Kapcori that intrigues me at all, then maybe it's Majestic Harbor, only because he has run further than this, and I just think that he is one who might really appreciate the cutback, and he hasn't ran behind, he hasn't won much, but he hasn't ran behind bad horses. He finished 2nd in Blue Skies and Rainbows at the start of the year, finished ahead of Drill there, and then in his 2nd start of the year, he ended up finishing behind Blingo and Imperative, who we obviously saw come back and win at Charlestown. So, the form is there if you kind of search for it a little bit. I do think Fury Kapcori should win this. He is the class of the field, but maybe the only other horse that would intrigue me a little is Majestic Harbor.
There's a few horses coming off layoffs, and they look like they're kind of using this as a prep, so I think you kind of have to go with Fury Kapcori in this spot. Clubhouse Ride does have some back class, and he chased him at a mile, and now he gets a mile and an eighth to kind of run him down, so we'll see. Ultimately, he'll probably stretch back out, and he seems to be at least a pretty consistent horse at his distance, and in his day, he kind of runs his race. So that's going to do it for our action this week. Of course, next week we'll preview the Belmont Stakes and take a look at the undercard race lining up for Belmont Day. That's going to do it for another edition of Down to the Wire.